Got a very interesting David update for you guys today because the former New York City medical examiner, okay, Barbara Butcher, actually sat down with the Criminally Obsessed podcast just a little while before all of the paperwork came out about the alleged timeline of the murder of Celeste and the dismemberment and all the horrible things that went down. But what's really interesting is there's a podcast here that I'm going to react to with you guys where she breaks down some really interesting facts about the state that Celeste's body was found in. And she raises some very, very interesting points, including the possibility that Celeste might well have actually put up a struggle against David and, you know, some of the things that were maybe found on or around her body that might give a little bit more understanding about what exactly went down between her and David on the unfortunate night that she lost her life. So I'm going to show you a few clips from this interview from this podcast that I think are really interesting. And I'll just kind of pause and give you guys my thoughts as we go. But I think inside this podcast are some very interesting things that relate to the autopsy and are just going to paint like a way clearer picture of how everything went down. So in lieu of a big update from the courthouse, I think this is very, very interesting. And there were some things in this interview that caught me by surprise. So here it is, okay? It's going to be talking about the blue parts in her body, the possibility of alcohol being in her system and all that kind of thing. But first thing that is basically going to come up here is, you know, before prosecutors actually revealed and made it official that David had used a chainsaw to cut up the body, Barbara identified it as a possible tool and gave some more insight into how Celeste's remains were found. So she was correctly predicting things that ended up coming out soon after, and it makes me feel like she's definitely credible. So listen to this.
When you see someone that's found not only decomposing, but dismembered like she was, what does this tell you about the person who did this to her?
Psychopath. You know, to dismember a human body, I suppose in this instance, it was for convenience. When the medical examiner's investigator showed up on scene, you know, the car was in a police impound lot. Looking in the trunk, the medical legal investigator, Karen Tapia, I believe is her name, she noted that it was a black body bag, double zippered with handles. So this is a heavy duty kind of body bag used often to take away multiple bodies from disasters. It's not an ordinary body bag. It's a transport bag, but you can buy online. And beneath that was a black plastic trash bag sealed up and containing her limbs. In the body bag was her torso and her head. In the trash bag were her arms and legs, dismembered with some kind of cutting edge. And that's an interesting thing I don't see here. I want to see what the forensic anthropologist says about the tool marks on the bone.
Right.
They tell you so much. And that is, we look at the bone where the cut occurred, and we can see, was it sawtoothed, like an ordinary saw? Was it a machete, which leave very marked, you know, some splintering and a heavy break? Or was it a chainsaw, which leaves its own particular marks? We don't see that in the report yet. And I know it takes some time for forensic anthropology to come to their conclusions.
So she's a sharp woman, right? So she put forward this possibility quite some time ago, saying, look, we're going to be able to know what cut up the body. We're going to be able to see the ligature marks and work out if it was a handsaw, a chainsaw, a machete. So this is the credibility that this woman is bringing to the table, and it's very, very, very interesting. And I also thought it was fascinating that she said straight up, the state the body was found in is indicative of a psychopath. This isn't a normal way of dealing with somebody, you know, the mere circumstances are an indication that David is indeed a psychopath. Now, I thought that was really, really interesting. So later on, she kind of opens up some more. She would point out that while the autopsy used the clinical term dismemberment for Celeste's limbs, it described her fingers as mutilated. She would actually break down some of Celeste's other injuries, and there could well be more beneath the surface that we've not paid attention to beyond, you know, the stabbing and the dismemberment and the chainsaw. There could have been more. There could have been physical injuries. You know, there could have been other altercations that went down that were kind of, you know, superseded by the state the body was found in.
Do you think this was sort of that time during the killing or before the killing?
Well, just the fact that the investigator used the term mutilated makes me think perimortem in the time of her death.
As a part of the killing.
Yeah, there's something else. Now, she has two fatal stab wounds. One is to the liver, and it's sharp, so I'm going to say it's likely a knife, probably a single-edged based on the description here. And yeah, you can see this now on this lower stab wound, it would be to my left, to the decedent's right. There's a defect there that goes into the liver. Now, that's going to cause a lot of bleeding, right? So that's a potentially fatal wound.
What Barbara's showing us right now is the actual autopsy reports, right? So these are the illustrations that were done at the time of autopsy. This is fascinating.
So on her left side, high up on the chest, just below the nipple, we see another stab wound. And this one is interesting. It goes between the ribs into the pleural space. In other words, your lungs are held in a sealed container, in a sense. And once that container is pierced, air rushes in and the lung collapses. So that would cause a terrible kind of suffocation, asphyxia. And interestingly, the cortical surfaces of the ribs are both, we call it disrupted. In other words, there's marks on them. And the cortical surface is the outer surface of your bone. It's very hard, and that's where your weight is supported. So those are very strong, dense areas of the bone, meaning that whatever she was stabbed with was heavy enough and sharp enough to cut into those ribs, into that bone. So, and the knife was not, let me put it this way, it was not just slipped in. It had to be stabbed in with enough force to cut that.
Wow. So she's saying that, some of these more serious things could have happened while Celeste were alive. And that David would have allegedly, if it was him, obviously, but allegedly, he would have had to use a lot of force. He would have had to really, really put his weight into it to actually cause injuries that are this devastating. And it just, again, I think indicates psychopathic behavior. I think this is just hard to even see anything other than this guy being a psychopath. Now, from here, she would explain that actually Celeste's injuries, in her belief, actually point to a possibility of a struggle. And it's possible that Celeste might well have put up a fight against David before she lost her life.
Now, something else I noted, this shows that there are other shallow cuts. Notice on the back view, that would be her right, there are multiple defects, 1 inch to, I think, 1 3/4 inches. In other words, small stab wounds, I think is what they're saying here. So not fatal wounds, but stab wounds here and there. There's an abrasion. There's multiple abrasions on her hand, on the dorsal surface, up here. Multiple linear abrasions. Does that mean she was dragged? Does that mean something else happened to her, some other kind of wound? I don't really know. But there were small defects in the skin, sharp defects. So was she stabbed multiple times?
So it seems like there were signs of a struggle. There were these sort of slices on her hands, or at least what looked like. Sounds like she may well have been putting up a struggle, trying to fight against him, trying to stop. And honestly, it just makes me so sad, because it just makes you imagine like the scenario, the situation this little girl was in when, David came at her with a knife. She was probably just absolutely dumbfounded, probably couldn't believe, like, you really coming at me with a knife, trying to kill me? Like, this poor little girl just had absolutely no idea just how dark this person she was dealing with was. And, it just really, really makes me sad to think about her kind of struggling in her final moments, thinking, what the fuck is this guy's coming at me with a knife? He really trying to kill me? Like, what have I gotten myself into? It's so, so sad to even just imagine that scenario, and, the desperate fight that she probably put up against this. And David wasn't a big guy, but Celeste was just a kid, man. And there really wouldn't have been too much of a way that she could have fought back and stopped this happening. It's so, so sad. So after this, she would go on to kind of examine the autopsy's wording, and would talk about objects, the word objects being used to describe the cause of death, and gave some more sort of insights into the decomposition, essentially just giving some more backstory and an understanding as to why the autopsy ended up saying what it said regarding the objects that she was killed with.
Yeah, that's correct. And then the stab wounds to her body appear to be from a sharp knife, because they have smooth edges. There are other ways to stab a body. And I noticed on the autopsy report, they said cause of death was multiple penetrating injuries, manner of death is a homicide, and how injury occurred was with objects. That's an interesting term. Now, part of this is because she was so very, very decomposed. It was really terrible. She was partially liquefied, partially skeletonized. There was extensive maggot activity.
And that would have happened if she was left out. I mean, she couldn't be sealed up in something for there to be insects, could she?
That's a very interesting question. Usually, if someone is instantly put in, if they're murdered, and then they're instantly put into a body bag, and their dismembered limbs are instantly put into a trash bag, that would likely prevent this insect activity. So what we can do is look at the development stages. We get eggs laid by flies, then they become maggots, then they become pupa, where they crawl off the body into another area and hatch again into flies. And based on the number of these areas where we find pupa or maggots, we can tell that the body was outside somewhere. And it even gives us an estimation of how long the person was dead. I'm not talking hours or even days. I'm talking about weeks. So if we see pupa at a scene, we know that the body was there for at least 2 weeks, possibly more. So that helps us with time of death. But that tells me that the body was out. It wasn't initially put into these body bags because they are sealed. Now, flies, the smell of this is, of course, absolutely unbearable. It's awful. Flies can smell decomposition and decay from hundreds of yards, maybe even a mile. I don't know exactly, but when this car was out on the street in Los Angeles, the smell had to be horrible. And you would see flies buzzing around this front trunk of the car.
Sure.
So any passerby would notice this pretty instantly, especially in that heat. So I believe she was left out for some time before she was put into those body bags.
Now, this is extremely interesting because a few people have put forward this theory that David actually might have taken the body to Santa Barbara immediately after the murder. Now, the murder allegedly went down between 10:10 and 10:30 p.m. Celeste had been driven from from her property in Lake Elsinore at 8:40 p.m. She arrived around 10:10 p.m. and allegedly the murder happened right after she arrived. A lot of people have put forward this theory because David drove around 11:30 to 2 hours north of Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, stayed there till the early hours of the morning, and then came back and got to a radio interview. He ordered the body bag, the chainsaw, all that kind of thing, and the alleged dismemberment took place on the 5th of May. But allegedly there were other trips to Santa Barbara. Now, what she said was very interesting. She said if a body is placed directly into a body bag immediately after the death, you don't see insect activity. Flies need to come and lay, this is so gross, but flies need to come and lay eggs on the decaying flesh for bugs and larvae and insects and maggots to begin to feast on the bio waste that is available on the body. Okay, I'm just going to try and speak about this in very matter-of-fact terms. So I'm sure that flies can still lay eggs and a body can still decay and get insect activity if it's left inside of his house, not in a body bag. If it was sealed in the Tesla from the get-go, probably would have been less likely that there would have been insect activity. The way she just said that with her expertise, it actually makes me think, did David take the body and go leave it like in the woods or something like that? Was he maybe hoping that this would happen, right? If you go and leave some meat out in the middle of in a park or some woods, you're going to see flies, you're going to see insects, you're going to see ants, you're going to see all sorts of things going after it. Now, you know, we saw a Twitch live stream where people were saying, "Oh, David, your house full of bugs." What was it? They said, "No, spiders. There's little spiders everywhere." So that makes you wonder: was that insect activity was happening inside of David's house, where he left the body in the garage, and maybe bugs were in there? You know, I'm sure bugs can get into a garage, not airtight. But it does make me think perhaps he went and left the body. Perhaps he went and found a little spot in Santa Barbara in the mountains, thinking, no one's going to find it. I'm going to put it up here. I'm going to leave it here. Maybe I'll deal with it later. Maybe he thought that was it. He was just going to leave it up there for good and that it would just go away. Then maybe he had a change of heart. Thought, no, I need to go back. Crazy. Okay, absolute insanity. This guy's a psychopath. But anyway, Barbara would also open up about one of the things that sort of has been a massive debate in this case, the alcohol allegedly found in Celeste's system, and kind of what the wounds on her body and some of the toxicology report might actually indicate about what was going on when she died.
She had a very low level of ethanol which does not necessarily mean that she ingested alcohol. When the body decomposes, it creates alcohols in the tissues. There was something about a methamphetamine and Adderall and Ritalin. Those are, types of stimulants. So it could be a perfectly, normal prescribed drug that she had on board. Again, I note she was only 5'2" and 71 pounds. The traumatic injuries, they show us the orientation. You can see that here, the way that the knife was angled. They perforate the skin, the soft tissue, and the liver, about 1.5 inches deep into the liver. And then, as I said, it was probably a collapsed lung because of the nature of how deep that knife went. So it says multiple skin defects are present over the torso, with many perforating the skin and soft tissue without hemorrhage. Interesting. Linear abrasions on the hand. I think we've got more cuts and wounds than just those 2 stab wounds that killed her. That bothers me a lot.
And that bothers you because that shows that there was possibly a struggle. There was attempts made to stab multiple times with possibly different objects.
Yeah, that's possible. I'm thinking, there's a difference between a stab and a cut. A stab goes deep. A cut is somewhat linear. It cuts through the skin and the flesh. It doesn't penetrate deeply. And I don't know if they were perimortem, postmortem, or antemortem. They didn't see extensive hemorrhage, but small cuts to the skin, although very, very painful, don't necessarily bleed a lot. And if they do bleed, it's superficial. It can be wiped off. That bothers me, that she was possibly cut before she was dead.
Well, and I think we went over like the depth of the penetrating wounds. The way you've described it, they were deep enough to puncture the lung, cause some level of asphyxiation, and that would be enough for her to perish.
So basically from here, okay, what she's going to explain is that either of the 2 stab wounds could have been fatal. It could have been either one of them that killed her. And she would basically go on to talk about this other substances that were found in Celeste's system. Now, I do think that it is quite interesting that, she said that, yeah, there was allegedly methamphetamine, but she might have been prescribed Ritalin or Adderall. She might have had ADHD, and that was completely normal. And the alcohol in her system may well just be part of the decomposition process. So she's going to kind of break all of that down.
That's right. The liver wound would be enough for her to bleed out. And the stab wound, although it didn't penetrate the lung, it did penetrate the chest cavity. So we could get a collapsed lung there. And that's a nasty way to die. Very painful, and it's a slow suffocation. I'm going to note also that there was no evidence of strangulation, which is interesting. Right. When we have a crime that's very personal, when a woman is killed by a man with whom there was some physical abuse or relations, very often there's strangling, and we don't see any evidence of that here. There's no hemorrhages to the strap muscles. The high eye bone is intact, and there's no injury to the neck itself. So that's, in ruling out certain things, it gives us a better focus on what's important here. On the toxicology, benzodiazepam, possibly a tranquilizer. And we don't know how much of tranquilizer was in the body. When someone's decomposed, we can't get a clear toxicology where we can see that it's there and how much is there. So we don't have blood that we can test. But we can test.
We just know that it's there.
Yeah, we know that it's there. Now, I noticed that the scene investigator, Tapia, collected the maggots at the scene. We can spin those down and get a toxicology from the maggots since they are eating the flesh. So, we learn so much from these autopsy reports.
So she's really digging deep into the autopsy, deeper than anyone else really, and getting a lot more understanding from it than I've ever seen personally. It's really, really interesting. Now, she would return to the dismemberment again and talk about that. And just bear in mind, this interview was before we knew that it was done with a chainsaw, but it's still really interesting to hear how she's kind of thinking about it.
Clothes, the underwear, her shirt had several cut marks. The leggings were in 3 pieces from this dismemberment. What does this tell you when the clothes are still on the victim like that?
She was stabbed through her, I think it was a tube top, and there were at least 3 defects in that tube top. So if I'm correct, those are sort of short so we can have the abdomen exposed. I don't know if all tube tops look like that, but that's what she was wearing along with leggings and socks. That means she was stabbed through the fabric. And I noticed at least 3 defects in that fabric, meaning it wasn't just the 2 fatal wounds, but there was another stab wound or cut to her body.
And they kept the clothes on as they dismembered her body. They kept those clothes on.
Yep. Yeah. It makes it harder, doesn't it? And again, it tells me something about the instrument that was used.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be a scalpel, because cutting through clothes and then through the flesh causes dulling, and you'd note that on the...
So elsewhere in the interview, she would also touch on the missing finger. Obviously, Celeste was missing, I believe, 2 fingers from her left hand. And she would kind of give some speculation about what might have happened to those fingers. I've seen a few theories going around that maybe David might have actually cut off the fingers to test burning them. He'd obviously bought the burn cage, maybe to just see if like he could actually get away with burning human remains in a burn cage. So he might have tested out the fingers. But she would give her some of her thoughts on it, and she would describe the whole killing as cold-blooded and utilitarian. So just heartless, basically. Psychopathic murder.
Pure speculation. When a person is killed and something's missing, like jewelry or fingers, when I think about souvenir, I think about serial killers,
Right.
because they often take souvenirs. This killing seems to be much more utilitarian to me. It was done with a knife, which is personal. So that means the perpetrator didn't have access to a gun, which would be so much easier. The fact that she was dismembered is utilitarian.
Right.
All this points to getting rid of a person. Not a killing of passion, not of jealousy, not of a huge fight that turned bad and turned physical. It's utilitarian. It's business. They needed to get rid of her.
And here's the thing, like there's a tattoo on her other finger that says shh on it.
Yeah.
And if you are looking to hide a body and dismember a body, why would you leave a tattooed finger on that body?
Amateur. Amateur. A professional would never leave the hands in dismembering someone. Never. You don't want fingerprints. Would never leave a tattooed finger. But what does that little tattoo say to me? She has a secret. Is the secret that she's seeing or having some relationship with this so-called celebrity singer? I never even heard of this person, but she has a secret. And that's why we say shh. And that's just my interpretation of it.
It is damning, right? I mean, the fact that it was a shush tattoo and they got them together and it's like you got this big secret and you're dealing with a minor, like it's just like, again, there's just so many things in this case that are pretty inexplicable. I mean, it's hard to even put yourself in the mindset of somebody so depraved. But anyway, one of the most disturbing parts of this interview would come after that, and this would be some discussion of, the eye that was missing. And, there's been a lot of debate about whether David actually removed Celeste's eye or whether this was, part of the decomposition process, but she would touch on this too.
There were other things here. Yeah. Mutilation of that. And
the eye, did you see the eye does that tell you anything that left eye was not present?
Mm-hmm.
Is that unusual, or is that something that just happens over a period of decomposition?
Good question. Terrible to think about, but the other eye was present, although liquefied, decomposed. Is there some way that eye, that missing orbit, could have been so decomposed that it liquefied and drained away? I don't know. It's possible it came out before.
Well, depending on which way our head was facing too for so long in that car.
Yeah.
That's so messed up, man. That's just so messed up. And the fact that she's an expert in this and she can't even say for sure one way or the other, I think it's interesting. But she would raise a really interesting question at the end of this. And this is something I'm going to talk about in even more detail in another video. But basically, she would touch on the question as to why. Why did David allegedly not actually follow through with disposing of this body?
Yeah. That gets impounded.
Mm-hmm.
One question we were thinking amongst ourselves, thinking about this with my team, was the suspect possibly unable to release this body, couldn't be separated from this body for some reason? Like, I'm getting into the psychology of it, but it almost feels like they didn't want to let go because It didn't go very far.
Interesting. It's certainly a stupid way to get rid of a body. I mean, it's obvious that there's a smell coming out of a car on a public street. Yeah, it's a stupid way to get rid of the body. So maybe there is some, I'm not a psychologist, but some reluctance to let go. That may be evidenced by the fact that she was kept somewhere before she was placed into the body bag. And we were surmising that based on the insect activity that occurred, no doubt, before she was placed into these body bags. Yeah, there's a circular defect on her left flank. There's multiple cuts into the tube top. What do these things mean? Yeah. You can almost develop a picture in your mind of somebody being cut multiple times or scraped and then stabbed fatally. It's not an efficient killing. Let's put it that way.
No.
Yeah. So, as we sometimes say, amateur.
I saw.
So he's basically saying this is an amateur hour murder, right? And look, this isn't a murder Olympics or nothing like that. I'm not trying to crack jokes about this, but basically she's just saying that, look, the situation was just so screwed, all right? This guy's a psychopath. He's exhibiting potentially signs of serial killer, and he's just amateur. It's just amateur hour. You're just shit at murders, and it's not a joke. Like, you're just shit. You're shit at this. You suck. Like, David sucked at this. He kind of sucked at music, and he sucked at committing crimes, allegedly. Okay, so I do feel like that's just a fact, all right? It's not, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, Barbara would go on to note that actually when Celeste's remains were found, they weighed 71 pounds. And, you know, there's some good reasons why the body might have weighed so little upon being found.
First, she's found. Her missing poster showed her weighing 120 pounds. Mm-hmm. Her remains weighed in at 71 pounds.
That's right. Yeah.
How much is this normal for decomposition? And how much is this, it tells us what her physical state was before she died?
That's an interesting question. We don't know if in the time between she was last spotted and the time she was found, how long was she alive? Was she starving? Or did the decomposition effectively dehydrate her to a certain extent? So we're about 60% water, our bodies. And in a hot sun, that will evaporate. Certainly like bodies out in the desert, they desiccate, they dry out very quickly and become mummies. In the case of this young girl, we do see some liquefaction in the liquid at the bottom of the body bag. So who knows? Was it strictly the result of evaporation before she was put in the bag? Or was she losing weight over some period of weeks? I don't really know. It's hard to figure out.
Is there anything?
So it's a weird, interesting point she makes, saying like, was this part of the decomposition? We don't know. She might have lost tons of weight in the lead up. It makes you wonder, was she malnourished? Was she not being looked after? Had she spent other time with David? He wasn't feeding her. Or was he on her about her weight? I don't really know, but it does suggest maybe a little bit of both. Okay. So she'd give more insight into something we discussed earlier, this burn cage, and some of the reasons that David might not have followed through with using it.
Wait for her. She was called to come to the house. He lay in wait for her. So the fact of having a chainsaw present and a we call them burn barrels, burn cage. That's a good way to dispose of a body, isn't it? Yeah. Those burn cages suck up enough oxygen that they burn very, very hot, well over 1,000 degrees, and you can cremate a body in them. And it would be easiest if the parts were dismembered with a chainsaw. That's the fastest way to do a dismemberment, and then put into this burn cage. Probably what you'd have left is ash and probably bone fragments as well. Cremation is never really complete. There's always something left behind. Why didn't he use, number one, is to set a fire anywhere in the Los Angeles area is probably a crime. To set
you go to prison for that. That's right.
I mean, look at Malibu. Look what happened. Burned down half the damn city. It's horrible. So if anyone noticed a burn cage in someone's yard, they would call the police immediately, the fire department. Those burn cages do contain the burning matter, but there's always embers that fly out. And it only takes one ember to set the grass on fire. And then next thing you know, you have a huge brush fire, which will spread rapidly in the winged heat.
Well, and this was in the wake of the Hollywood Hills and the Palisades fires. I mean, this was literally in the wake of all of that,
Yeah.
as far as the time period goes.
So it's interesting, right? Because there was rumors that maybe the murder had taken place sooner and David was using the fires as cover. It turned out that that wasn't the case, but I think just in a climate of, you know, wildfires in Los Angeles, it would be very dumb, amateur hour, to try and even use, let alone to try and buy, let alone use a burn cage in Hollywood. Ridiculous. Only takes, as she said, it only takes one ember to light the whole brush on fire, and then you got another Palisades on your hands. So anyway, the last thing I'm going to point out from this interview is this. Basically, Barbara kind of finally addresses the possibility that other people might have been involved. And again, so many people have said it before. It's not easy to move a whole human body. It's not easy to chainsaw a body apart. You might need two hands to operate the chainsaw. You need to hold the... Look, I ain't tried to do that. I'm never going to try to do that. But I still think other people were involved personally.
Use the term they.
Yeah.
If you have an entourage, if you have friends around, people who would say to you, yeah, let's see, don't use the burn cage, yeah, because I know we're going to get caught. Or, I know, don't use the chainsaw because it's hard to clean. Or let's get a body bag. We can order it online. I hear advisors in the background. I do. I can't picture one person, a singer, sitting around planning how to dispose of a body without someone else knowing his thoughts. Just an idea, but there you go.
Yeah, I know they've got some very serious witnesses that they're looking at. So yeah.
Yeah. I think someone helped him. That's just my opinion, okay? But look, I thought it's a really interesting interview. I hope you found that useful. Okay, I'm going to do another video just covering kind of some of the speculation theories that are going around about why David actually decided to follow through this, why he approached this situation in the way that he did. And I'm going to kind of get deep into some of the comments and look at some of the theories that you guys have, been spreading, and some of the information, the evidence that's going around about why on earth this happened. So stay tuned for another video about that. I hope you found this one useful, and I'll be back with some more content. I'm going to do another Chud video today, and I'm going to do another David video today. So it's going to be a 4-4. Hope you guys are enjoying the content, staying locked in, all of that good stuff, man. I'm very, very grateful for you guys supporting and watching and trusting me, man. It's you know what I'm saying? This is my dream job, doing YouTube. So I'm so grateful we get to do this. Even if I'm going through it, even when I'm going through it mentally, I'm so glad I get to do this with you guys. So keeps me going, man. Appreciate you guys. Catch you guys in the next video. I'm out. Bye.